Leslie Thompson, and welcome to Executive Insights. Today we'll be exploring a topic that can be both mysterious and intimidating to entrepreneurs: forming a board of directors. With me is Dennis Cagan, a seasoned executive, consultant, investor, and professional board member who has been on more than 40 boards of directors. Dennis, welcome.
Thank you, Leslie. Pleased to be here.
Well, you have not only more than 30 years experience in C-level corporate management, but you obviously have a wealth of experience on boards of directors. You're currently writing a book about the formation of a board of directors for small and private companies. Tell our viewers a little bit about why that's beneficial for a company to have a board.
In doing some research, I've discovered that there's been almost no books written on this particular subject of American business, which is the small, private, early stage company board. A lot of books and articles on larger corporate boards, and that advice is really targeted at your Fortune 1000 type board, where a director has different kinds of responsibility at different levels of oversight in the company. But there's nothing written, and very few articles even, for smaller companies, early stage companies, private companies, venture or angel investor finance companies, about boards of directors. So there's some mystery around it. A lot of the entrepreneurs get their information about boards from their investors, which of course is only one perspective, and it's not necessarily from the entrepreneur's standpoint. So therein lies the need for the book. In terms of why form a board, which is your question, nobody knows everything, and the older you get and the longer you go, the more things you realize you didn't know before, and those are mistakes you wouldn't have made had you been forewarned about them. Creating a board can both be good and bad. It can be a tremendous benefit in terms of the variety and depth of advice you can get from good directors. There can also be some challenges and some risks in terms of control, governance, voting control, issues, direction, strategy, finance, everything to do with the company itself. The board is theoretically the governing body. Now, it's much less so in a privately held company, but then again, it depends on who controls the board and what investors control the company. But it's quite beneficial for anybody running a company or in any capacity of senior management to be able to get a variety of advice that broadens the spectrum beyond their own direct experience of the management team, and is able to bring on whether it's domain expertise from investors, whether it's specific expertise in categories like finance, sales, marketing, whatever it may be, whether it's government relations, any areas that you could use additional strength and additional perspective. A board allows you to get that.
That begs the question then, how do you find those right candidates? How do you find those subject matter experts who are not only capable of, but also willing to lend their time and expertise to a board of directors?
Well, in the small circles among board members, the first qualification that's usually talked about is, in order to be on a board, all you have to do is have been on a board. And so it's really, you're, in terms of forming your first board or forming a board, it's a matter of who you already know, and it's a matter of who you know that may also know somebody. And so in terms of the book, the first part of this particular chapter of the book is going to be it's going to be published as an article in Directors and Boards magazine in an upcoming issue. But basically, the CEO, the owner, the entrepreneur, whoever it is that is interested in forming a board, and there's a difference between a board of directors and a board of advisors, and that's covered in one of the chapters in the upcoming book as well. But in terms of forming that, you first need to look at who you know that may have expertise that you can draw on in a more formalized way, other than calling them up and saying, "Can I have a cup of coffee?" But in a direct, formalized way where you're regularly reporting on what's happening with the company, and they're regularly giving you feedback on that. And so you look at who you know, you look at who you know that might know somebody. So for example, your accountant, your attorney, your pastor, your next door neighbor, your mother or your father. If you're younger, your mother or father may have business associates. You look at those people, and then you look at who they may know or who they may come in contact with. Now that's working from the inside out. You want to work from the outside in, and there have been cases where I've done this, and I've seen it done very successfully, where in a formal structure there's been a governance committee put together, or if you're getting around the table and deciding, hey, let's have a board of directors, who could we have on it? You may look at somebody who's a notable industry expert in your field, and you may say, look, we would love to have that person, he or she, on our board. You may not know them. Nobody you know may know them. But it's perfectly acceptable in this day and age to go ahead and reach out to them, whether it's email, whether it's a phone call to their office, if you sweet talk their admin or their secretary a little bit, to get through to that person. It's always an honor to be asked to be considered for a board, and even if they wouldn't consider your board for whatever reason, they will usually stop, take a few moments to talk to you, and they may also be able to recommend somebody that they know. Well, I wouldn't have time to do it because I'm on the board of General Motors and this one and that one, but I do have a colleague that's looking at getting on some boards and they might fit your bill. So you can't be too bashful. You have to realize they're going to take it as an honor to be approached, and you have to be willing to reach out and discuss things with them. You have to also have some degree of candor in terms of telling them about your business. But it's recruiting. It's just like recruiting an employee, just at a higher level. That's
very interesting. With small companies, with startups, with early stage companies, obviously capital may be limited. How do they navigate the somewhat touchy issue of compensation for a board of directors?
Well, I'm on the board with somebody. Probably up until recently, they were probably making close to $1 million a year just from sitting on boards.
Wow.
And so this is not your Fortune 1000 board we're talking about. They're smaller companies. Mm-hmm. They may be up to a few $100 million, but they're privately held. If they're larger, they can afford to pay a annual retainer, an annual fee for your board members, and that could range anywhere up to maybe $25,000 a year. Usually it doesnn't go much above that unless it's a fairly large private company. But typically it can be done for less. Maybe it's $1,000 a month. Maybe it's nothing. If you've got an early stage company, a startup company, you haven't raised outside capital yet, you may attract very, very highly qualified directors without paying them in any cash. In that case, you have to look at what your equity or what your other currency options are. Mm-hmm. If you have plans for the company to at some point eventually have a liquidity event, then stock options or warrants or some type of profit sharing may work. If not, there are people that have not been on a lot of boards but are well qualified to be on a board by virtue of their experience, not their board experience. They may sit on a board to get one under their belt and to be able to list it, and having accomplished it, for no equity and no cash. Mm-hmm. It kind of depends. I've recruited directors, I've recruited people who have been on boards of General Motors, Hughes Aircraft, Raytheon, New York Times, Eli Lilly, and you go on and on and on, where the compensation was strictly stock options. And in some cases, these board seats lasted many, many years before there was even a hint of potential liquidity. But they did it because they liked the business that we were in. They liked the people that they were sitting on the board with. They found it interesting. It was challenging. In some cases, they may not have sat on small boards. Maybe they wanted to add a little bit of that experience. Or in the cases that I'm mentioning, maybe they hadn't sat on any boards before, and they're looking to sit on their first board. So it's a combination of really liking what you're doing and them learning something from it and them gaining something in terms of benefit from the other people that they're sharing the board experience with. So it's a lot to do with who else is on the board. And then there could be a small component of cash, an equity component. There may be services. Maybe you're able to do some services for them in return for their participation in advising you.
Interesting. So there is a lot of flexibility there. You mentioned a moment ago that one of the chapters of the book will differentiate between a board of directors and a board of advisors. Can you very briefly summarize some of the key considerations and the differences there?
Yes. Typically a board of advisors isn't looked on with the same prestige that a board of directors is. If you're a director or an advisor and it's on your resume, the board of advisors doesn't have quite the cachet that being on the board of directors does. As far as getting advice, if you're the entrepreneur, the owner, the CEO of the company, you can get good advice in both contexts, board of advisors, board of directors. Typically speaking, the board of directors is a more intense experience. It's a more regularly scheduled, more disciplined experience. It's got more of a governance component to it. rather than just a business advisory component. A board of directors has no governance, I'm sorry, a board of advisors has no governance component to it. It's just giving advice. So those kinds of meetings would include you bringing the advisors up to speed on what the most recent business activities have been, and then getting their feedback, either individually with individual phone calls or individual meetings over coffee or lunch, or collectively in terms of a group meeting, which is good because you get the synergies going. But basically then you're getting their feedback on what you're doing, their advice. They may identify some pitfalls or some opportunities. They may give you some feedback on how you approach something, but it's more of that. It's less around the governance. It's less around, there's no legal ramifications for being on a board of advisors. So a lot of people that won't sit on a board of directors because they're concerned about the liability, about directors and officers, D&O insurance, or other aspects, or maybe the commitment that the company can't compensate them for in cash.
Excellent. Well, we are very excited about the forthcoming book, and thank you so much for sharing your insights today. And thank you for joining us. I'm Leslie Thompson. We'll see you next time.